These are two books I created to store my framelits from Stampin' Up! And I wanted to show you how I made these. I like this one that I'm showing you first because it uses book rings that can be removed and more pages can be added onto it as you need them. And on these pages I have two separate magnetic strips so that you can reach your fingernail in there and lift up the framelits dies. And I'm showing you the glitter on the side here. I don't know if you could see it. These pages, this is one that I created first, my first Framelits Keeper, as I like to call them, and they have full magnetic pages in that one. This is medium weight chipboard that I use for the core of the covers, and I'm using my Fiskars rotary cutter. I like this because I can cut chipboard and I can cut multiple sheets of cardstock. I still prefer my Stampin' Up! Trimmer for cutting or scoring just 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch. I'm cutting 2 pieces of 6.5 by 6.5 chipboard for this book. I'm using the Quattro Fancy Designer Series paper by Stampin' Up! For the book covers. And I'm using We Are Memory Keeper's Corner Chomper to round the corners at 1/2 inch. And I'm going to round the corners on all 4 sheets at once. I'll speed up some of the repetitive parts throughout this video. I'm also going to round the corners on these chipboard covers just 1 sheet at a time. I like to use white acrylic paint for the edges of the covers on the chipboard. This just makes the glitter a little bit more noticeable. And I'm just painting it on each of the edges of both sheets of chipboard. After the acrylic dries on the chipboard, I use Mod Podge for adhering the DSP to the covers. And I always have to cover my Mod Podge with a piece of foil. That's what this is. I actually just took a piece of foil and covered it. There's usually some kind of chipboard or paper covering it, but it seems to get really soggy. So now I'm just stirring this up, and I just use the other end of a paintbrush for that. And then just pouring a little bit in a dish and using a sponge brush to paint it onto the chipboard. I always close up my Mod Podge container right after I pour it into the dish so that it doesn't dry up too fast. So I'm just painting on the Mod Podge onto the chipboard, and I'm not painting it on too thick. It can get pretty messy when you're trying to press the Designer Series paper onto the chipboard. Now I'm just lining it up to make sure that it matches the edges. And I'm using a bone folder to smooth it out. I'm not pressing too hard. If you press too hard, I think it tends to make the paper stretch a little bit, and it tends to make it warp a little bit more. It's going to warp anyway, but I use a heavy book while it's drying to prevent the warping. And I'm making sure that the pattern is the right direction. I've made many mistakes where the pattern wasn't the same direction on both sides. And I'm just going to do the same thing on the other piece of chipboard. I'm running my fingers over the edges to make sure that no glue is hanging off over the edges. I want to make sure it dries smooth to prepare the glitter glue. And then I'm just laying heavy books on top to prevent warping, and I'll let it dry like that. This is what I keep my stickles and other glitter glue containers in. It's just an index card keeper, but I've found that it works really well, especially when you like to store the containers upside down, ready for use. And I'm just making a test sheet with just various colors just to kind of test what color I want after it dries. And now I'm using the We Are Memory Keepers cinch. It's a bookbinding tool. This will punch the holes. I've pressed in the number 3 and the number 10 pegs. And now I'm figuring out which side I want my holes to go onto. And I'm just going to push it all the way into the tool. And I'm making sure it's pushed all the way in. And then I'm just going to pull the lever down, and it's going to punch 2 holes. The middle hole I'm going to have to change the settings a bit to get the middle one. There's no center peg when you have it the slide ruler all the way pushed in. There's 2 center pegs instead of 1. So now I'm marking the center of the book cover. So that I can line up the number 6 peg. And I'm using this slide to line up that center mark with the number 6 peg. And I need to pull out the number 3 and number 10 pegs so that they don't make holes there. And I'm pushing in the number 6 peg. Then I'm just pushing it all the way in, making sure that it is all the way in. And then I'm pressing down the lever to make the center hole. And since I have the peg already set, I can just push the other piece in and pull down the lever. Now that the glitter glue has dried onto my test sheet, I've noticed that one of them in particular matched really well, and that's Fruit Punch by Stickles. So I'm going to apply this to all edges of both covers. And I'm just getting really up close, and I'm just going to apply it very carefully to the edge, to each edge. I apologize for the blurriness. I set it on autofocus because I wanted to get a good up close, clear image of the glitter glue. And I sped up this part of the video because it's just the same thing on all edges. And I'm running the tip along the edge. Also, sometimes it doesn't fill in very well, and so I like to run the tip along it to make sure it spreads on evenly. And I set down 2 tiles. These are just tiles I got from Home Depot. I like to set things on them to dry when I don't want to set them on a flat surface. So now I'm using Crystal Effects by Stampin' Up. This is just when after the stickles or glitter glue dries, it's kind of gritty on the edge, so I like to apply Crystal Effects to the edge to kind of smooth it out, make it more shiny, and make it not so gritty, make it a little bit more smooth. It takes a while to dry, so I usually allow at least a couple hours for it to completely dry. And I use this also to run the tip along the edge and make sure that the Crystal Effects is spread on evenly. And I'll speed this video up for the other edges. Sometimes I have to use my finger also because I don't want any parts of it to dry on the edge because it's shiny and the designer series paper is not. So I'm just setting these to dry. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn how to make the pages of the Framelits Keeper, please go to video number 2. Thanks.